The rise and fall of the ace culture. At the beginning of World War II, Germany believed it had perfected the art of air combat. Its early victories across Poland, France, and the Low Countries convinced the world that the Luftwaffe's fighter pilots were the best on Earth. They were ruthless, disciplined, and experienced. But this superiority rested on a dangerous flaw: Germany's complete reliance on the ACE system, an old-world tradition dating back to World War I. To the German high command, the individual fighter pilot was a knight of the sky, a warrior whose personal skill was more important than any team strategy, ground coordination, or industrial support. The result was the birth of an elite group of super pilots. Erich Hartmann, 352 kills. Gerhard Backhorn, 301 kills. Gunther Rahl, 275 kills. No air force in history ever produced aces with numbers like these. But hidden beneath the surface was the truth. Germany's aces had become both its strength and its fatal weakness. Because while the Luftwaffe celebrated individual heroics, the United States pursued something different, something modern, organized, and utterly devastating. The coming clash would reveal that the future of air warfare did not belong to the lone ace. It belonged to a system.
America's system: industrial plus tactical plus coordinated. Across the Atlantic, the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, watched the early war carefully. They studied every German victory, every Luftwaffe tactic, every failure of the Allied air forces in France. By the time America entered the war in 1941, U.S. aviation leaders had reached a clear, ironclad conclusion. Quote, "No single pilot, no matter how skilled, can win an air war. The system wins. The team wins." End quote. And so, America built a war machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Standardized training. Every American fighter pilot received the same training, the same manuals, the same tactical doctrine. No individual genius necessary, just competence, discipline, teamwork. Rotation policy. German aces flew until they were killed. American pilots rotated home after a combat tour to train the next generation, creating a teaching pipeline Germany could never match. Industrial supremacy. The U.S. trained more pilots in 1 year than Germany did in the entire war. The U.S. built fighters by the tens of thousands: P-47s, P-38s, P-51s, standardized, reliable, fast. Squadron-based tactics. The USAF emphasized wingman tactics, coordinated attacks, disciplined formations, and consistent doctrine. American pilots didn't need 300 kills. They needed survival. They needed team victory. They needed control of the sky. And the U.S. system was designed to deliver exactly that.
The turning point, 1943. By 1943, Germany's victories in Russia and Europe had slowed. Losses increased. Fuel shortages worsened. New pilots received only half the training time they had before. Meanwhile, the United States, powered by factories in Detroit, California, Washington, and New Jersey, poured fighters into the war at a pace that stunned German observers. The RAF and USAAF began the daylight bombing campaign. The Luftwaffe responded by throwing its best pilots into the fray. But the Germans encountered something they had never faced before. Squadrons that stayed in tight formation, wingmen that covered each other, pilots who followed doctrine exactly, a system that never broke down, and behind them, an industrial ocean of replacement planes and pilots. Germany's best pilots began to die, not because they were inferior, but because they were alone. The United States wasn't trying to win dogfights. America was trying to grind the Luftwaffe out of existence. And the Germans were about to discover the awful truth. Against a system, heroes are irrelevant.
The day Germany realized. That day came in late 1943, when the U.S. introduced long-range escort fighters, especially the P-47 Thunderbolt with extended range, and the P-51 Mustang. Suddenly, German aces, who had spent years dominating the skies, found themselves facing fresh American pilots, well-coordinated squadrons, aircraft with superior range, a replacement pipeline Germany could never match, pilots who followed tactics perfectly. Luftwaffe intelligence reports recorded phrases like, "Enemy fighter units act as a single organism. They protect their bombers with iron discipline. We cannot break their formations." German fighters weren't looking for glory. They weren't chasing kill counts. They were executing a strategy designed to suffocate the Luftwaffe, one formation at a time. German aces found themselves shooting down bombers, only to be hunted relentlessly by U.S. fighters working in perfect coordination. The Luftwaffe had trained knights. America had trained professionals. And the knights, for the first time, were losing.
The American system takes the skies. In early 1943, as the air war over Europe intensified, the German Luftwaffe still believed deeply in a notion forged during the Spanish Civil War and refined during the Blitzkrieg. Air combat was the realm of individual mastery. Victory belonged to the pilot who could think faster, turn tighter, or fire more precisely. The system that had produced men like Adolf Galland, Günter Röhl, and Walter Novotny seemed invincible. An elite machine powered not by numbers or factories, but by extraordinary talent. Yet by mid-war, that philosophy began to collide with something entirely different brewing across the Atlantic. It wasn't a single tactic, a miracle aircraft, or a lone ace that changed the balance. It was the American way of air war, industrial, systematic, and relentlessly standardized. The day Germany realized this shift was the day they understood that their greatest advantage, their aces, was becoming irrelevant. The American pilot did not enter the cockpit as a lone warrior. He was the final link in a vast chain, stretching from training fields in Arizona to assembly lines in Detroit and aircraft plants in California. By 1943, the United States had crafted a repeatable formula that transformed ordinary young men into uniformly skilled fighter pilots. Where Germany relied on a small cadre of elite veterans flying hundreds of missions, the U.S. Air Force's mass-produced competence. Every pilot practiced the same formation flying, the same gunnery maneuvers, the same radio procedures, and the same teamwork, until the entire system worked like a single organism in the sky. This industrialized approach to training meant an American replacement pilot stepping into the cockpit of a P-47 or P-38 had already logged more flight hours than many mid-level Luftwaffe officers. This doctrine translated into a new kind of air combat. American fighters moved not as scattering individuals, but as coordinated units. Mutual support wings, energy retention tactics, and disciplined altitude management. In the eyes of German pilots used to chaotic swirling dogfights, the U.S. formations behaved unnervingly like machines. Their goal was not to duel the Luftwaffe one-on-one. It was to control space, maintain speed, and deny opportunities. A single German ace diving in for a kill might suddenly find himself bracketed by two wingmen he never saw. For the first time since 1939, German pilots faced opponents they couldn't easily isolate or bait into turning contests. American fighters refused to play by the old rules.
The revolutionary shift became unmistakable with the arrival of the long-range escort fighters that the 8th Air Force had desperately needed. Early P-38 missions hinted at the change, but the introduction of the P-47 with drop tanks, followed by the P-51 Mustang, was the decisive break. The U.S. fighter screen expanded with each passing month, moving deeper into German airspace, staying tighter around bomber formations, and attacking with coordinated flood tactics designed to overwhelm even veteran Jagdgeschwader units. The Luftwaffe aces, many of whom had survived since the early days of the war, now found themselves facing waves of pilots who never flew alone. A single misjudged dive against a bomber box might trigger a counterattack from a full squadron of escorts, each pilot connected by radio discipline and trained responses. By late 1943, the Germans began to understand something chilling. It no longer mattered that they had the greatest individual pilots in the world. Their veterans were being expended in fights where skill alone could not overcome numbers, radios, coordination, or fuel-rich American engines built for climbing and diving rather than tight turn duels. Every German loss hurt because each ace carried irreplaceable experience accumulated over hundreds of missions. Meanwhile, every American replacement pilot entering combat represented the predictable output of a training pipeline designed to produce thousands more exactly like him. Germany's realization came not in a single battle, but slowly, across countless engagements where the old ways of airfighting proved hopelessly outdated. Their pilots spoke of it with frustration. The Americans fought differently, not as individuals, but as a system. And systems, once they gain momentum, are far harder to defeat than men. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous, still capable, still led by legends, but it was bleeding experience faster than it could be replaced, while the United States was only increasing in strength. The balance had shifted, and the skies over Europe were beginning to reflect it.
The death of the ace era. By early 1944, the once fearsome Luftwaffe fighter arm, built on the brilliance of individual aces, was approaching a breaking point. For nearly 5 years, Germany's greatest strength had been its extraordinary pilots, men who had survived Spain, Poland, France, the Battle of Britain, and the Eastern Front. They had honed personal combat techniques to perfection, developing instincts that made them legends in the cockpit. But as the war reached its middle years, the skies over Europe began to change. What unfolded was not a single battle, nor a dramatic collapse, but a slow inevitability as industrialized air power began to crush the romantic age of the lone ace. This was the moment history now calls the death of the ace era. To understand the shift, one must understand the differences between the German and American approaches to air war. The Luftwaffe followed a Darwinian philosophy. The best survived, the best taught themselves, and the best won. Their top pilots flew non-stop, sometimes 600 to 800 missions, gaining experience no Allied pilot could match. But this came at a cost. Their knowledge stayed with them, written into their reflexes, but almost never passed on. Germany had no deep evolving training doctrine, no standardized flight schools, no mass production of instructors, no rotating veteran aces home to teach the next generation. Pilots learned in combat or not at all. It created heroes, but it created no future.
The Americans built the opposite. They constructed an air force not of individuals but of systems, structures, and training manuals so detailed they could turn a farm boy into a reliable fighter pilot in months. Veterans were rotated back to teach. New pilots practiced mutual support, altitude discipline, and radio coordination before they ever saw an enemy. And when the United States entered full industrial mobilization, it unleashed an avalanche of aircraft and manpower the Luftwaffe had no answer for. For every German ace that fell, an irreplaceable library of experience was lost. For every American rookie lost, another stepped forward already trained to fight exactly the same way. The breaking point came in 1944 with the arrival of the long-range escort Mustang, the P-51.
Suddenly, bomber formations could be protected all the way to deep targets like Berlin, Regensburg, Augsburg, and Schweinfurt. The Luftwaffe's greatest hunting grounds, once safe havens where German aces stalked helpless bombers, were gone. The escorts didn't scatter into dogfights. They executed disciplined air superiority sweeps, slashing into German units before they could organize. This shift devastated the Luftwaffe leadership. Missions that once produced easy kills now became deadly ambushes. For German aces, this was the beginning of the end. Skill could not counter mathematics. A pilot, no matter how brilliant, could not outfight fuel shortages, dwindling aircraft quality, collapsing training programs, or the crushing weight of Allied numbers. Many Luftwaffe veterans described a hopelessness settling in. They fought swarms of P-51s, P-47s, and P-38s, flown by pilots who didn't need to be exceptional individually because their tactics, teamwork, and coordination made them collectively unstoppable. The sky itself felt American.
Young German rookies entered combat with barely 100 hours of flight time, compared to the 250 to 300 hours of an American trainee. Many died on their first mission, some within minutes. The aces who survived felt themselves becoming relics of an older age. Their style of one-on-one dueling and personal hunts meant nothing against a wall of fighters that moved like a single organism. Their greatest frustration wasn't the enemy, it was the realization that the Luftwaffe had failed to prepare for the future. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer losing aircraft, it was losing pilots, the one resource that cannot be replaced by factories. Jagdgeschwader units became hollow shells, squadrons with famous names but few veterans left to carry them. Battles like Big Week, the approach to D-Day, the relentless escort sweeps over Germany, and the crumbling Eastern Front all accelerated the collapse. The Allied fighters, guided by radar networks, long-range radios, shared tactics, and a bottomless replacement pool, dominated every dimension of the war in the air. The ace era did not end because pilots became less skilled. It ended because air war evolved, from individual duels to industrialized strategy, from survival contests to logistical ones. The United States won the air over Europe not by creating heroes, but by creating a system in which heroes were unnecessary. By 1945, the skies told the story plainly. The Luftwaffe's last surviving aces were alone, exhausted, and outnumbered. The romantic image of the lone master pilot had died, replaced by the future of warfare, coordinated, systematic, and overpoweringly industrial. In that sense, the death of the ace era was not a tragedy, but an evolution, and the air forces of the world would never be the same again.